Have you ever noticed how a single moment of desire can take over your entire mind? It starts small, a passing impulse, a flicker of curiosity, a thought that brushes against your awareness for just a second. And yet, somehow, without your consent, it spreads, it grows roots, it begins to pulse beneath your skin like a quiet drumbeat that you can't unhear. Your breathing changes, your attention narrows, time slows, and your inner world shifts toward one thing, the thing you suddenly feel you must have. It could be a body, a face, a touch. But look closer, and you'll see that lust rarely begins with the body. It begins with a hunger. There is a particular silence that precedes it, the silence of a mind that does not want to be alone with itself, the silence of a heart that is tired of feeling hollow. Lust, in its most raw form, is less about physical satisfaction and more about escape. Escape from loneliness, escape from boredom, escape from the feeling of not being enough, or being unseen, or being untouched by meaning. Lust is the door you run through when the room inside feels too empty. Your brain knows this. Neuroscience suggests that lust activates the seeking system, the part of the mind that chases thrill and reward, not fulfillment. It is the anticipation, not the act, that grips you. Desire becomes a loop, a self-reinforcing echo. The more you feed it, the louder it grows. You don't crave the object itself, you crave the feeling it promises to erase. The trembling inner space you don't want to sit with. The ache you'd rather numb, so you tell yourself it's instinct. Biology, just being human, and part of it is. But there is another truth, one harder to admit. Lust thrives where the heart has been starving for a long time, when affection was unreliable, when love felt distant, when validation came in rare and unpredictable doses, when you learned to chase intensity because gentleness felt too unfamiliar to trust. You are not broken for feeling this. You are human. You are someone who has learned to mistake desire for connection, because that is what the world taught you. This is not about shame, not about guilt, not about moral judgment. It is an invitation to finally look directly at the hunger inside you, instead of letting it drive your hands, your thoughts, your nights, your choices. To understand lust, we must return to where we first learned to crave. Do you remember the first time you felt a hunger that had nothing to do with food? Not the stomach kind, but the one that lived quietly behind your ribs. It may have appeared in a small moment, a child sitting in a room full of people, yet somehow feeling invisible. You were there, physically present, but the warmth you needed didn't arrive. Someone might have been talking, laughing, busy, distracted, but not with you, not for you. You watched affection move around you like sunlight falling everywhere except where you sat. And in that moment, something inside you learned to want. Maybe your parents loved you. Maybe they tried their best. But love is not only about presence. It is about attunement. The way a caregiver looks into a child's eyes and silently says, "I see you, I feel you, you matter here." If that gaze came inconsistently warm one day, cold the next, your heart learned instability. You learned that comfort is not guaranteed, that closeness is unpredictable, that affection must be chased. Attachment theory calls this an anxious bond. The child becomes a seeker. They learn that desire can feel like survival. And so, even before you understood the word longing, your nervous system was already practicing it, rehearsing it, building the pathways that would one day make lust feel like oxygen. You reached for things: a toy, a blanket, the sound of someone's footsteps returning home, and those moments taught you a hidden rule of the world. Relief is something you must pursue. No, one told you this directly, but your body understood. The dopamine that surged when attention finally arrived created a blueprint, a pattern, a promise. If I want something enough, I will feel whole again. But wholeness never lasted, not then and not now. The emotional hunger lived beneath every attempt to fill it. You were not craving the object you were craving, the feeling of being held, seen, chosen. But a child does not have the language to say, "I feel alone." They only feel the ache. So the heart found its own way to soothe itself. Daydreams, fascination, fantasy, desire became a quiet companion, the only thing that seemed willing to stay when others didn't. And what begins as a child's coping mechanism becomes an adult's addiction to intensity. You chase what once represented comfort. You chase the promise of warmth that was never consistent enough to trust. The child grows older, but the hunger stays. Have you ever mistaken hunger for desire? You grow older, and it no longer looks like a child waiting for someone to notice them. Now, it appears as attraction, sudden, magnetic, overwhelming. You see someone, or think of someone, or remember someone, and for a moment, it feels like gravity, as if your body is leading, but really, it is the emptiness beneath your ribs calling out for relief. Lust walks in, looking like passion, but its footsteps are carved by loneliness. You tell yourself it's natural, you're just attracted, you're just human. Yet the pattern repeats itself in a way that feels strangely familiar: boredom, then emptiness, then that spark of craving. It doesn't matter whether the desire is for a person, a face on a screen, a memory, or a fantasy. Anything that promises escape becomes sacred for a moment. You drift into daydreams, into imagined closeness, into scenes where you feel chosen, wanted, pulled into warmth. And in that temporary illusion, you finally feel alive, but the relief never lasts. You feel it in the quiet moments afterward, when the body relaxes and the mind returns to itself. There's a heaviness, a dull echo. The same ache you tried to outrun sits exactly where it always has. And then comes the guilt, not because you did something wrong, but because you know the relief was only borrowed. You didn't solve the hunger, you fed the shadow of it, so you repeat the cycle. You scroll endlessly, hunting for a spark. You talk to someone, not because you feel connected, but because you need to feel wanted. You engage in intimacy without intimacy. You touch without being touched. You feel skin without being seen. And the world encourages you to call this freedom, when really, it is a quiet form of dependence. Psychology calls this compensatory desire, chasing external stimulus to regulate internal emptiness. Neuroscience shows that the anticipation of pleasure releases far more dopamine than the pleasure itself, which means the craving you feel isn't for the blind experience, it's for the escape. Lust is a mask the psyche wears to avoid looking into its own loneliness. It is not evil. It is not shameful. It is simply a signal, a flare from the parts of you that still wait to be held with gentleness. But desire doesn't explain itself. It only pulls. It only burns. And to understand why this fire grows so easily, we must look at the mind itself, the chemicals, the circuitry, the ancient survival systems that shape how you crave. But what is happening in the brain during this? Have you noticed that the moment before you get what you want often feels more intense than the moment after? That brief spark, the rise of anticipation, the heartbeat that picks up, that's where the real power of desire lives. Neuroscience shows that lust is driven not by satisfaction, but by expectation. The brain releases dopamine not when you receive pleasure, but when you anticipate it. The promise becomes more intoxicating than the experience itself. You think you're chasing the person, the touch, the moment. But what you're really chasing is the chemical surge your brain has learned to associate with possibility. The body prepares, the mind sharpens, the imagination paints vivid scenes. And inside the limbic system, the ancient emotional brain, a signal fires. This could be the thing that makes you feel whole. But dopamine has a trick hidden inside it, something researchers call the reward prediction error. Each time you indulge, the brain expects the reward to be as powerful as the anticipation, but the actual experience rarely matches the fantasy. So the mind adjusts not by craving less, but by craving more. The high never reaches the height of the hunger, so the hunger grows. This is how desire becomes compulsion, how curiosity becomes fixation, how longing becomes dependency. It's not that the body wants more, it is the mind that cannot rest. Sexual desire itself is natural, rooted in biology and survival. It comes from the limbic system, the same circuitry that drives hunger and fear. But compulsive desire, the kind that pulls you toward habits you regret, doesn't come from the body. It comes from emotional insecurity. When affection felt unpredictable, the brain learned to overvalue intensity, to crave what burns rather than what warms. So lust becomes something more than physical. It becomes a search for control, a way to briefly silence the emptiness. A search for validation proof that you are still desired, still wanted, still seen. A search for escape from loneliness, from stress, from the quiet spaces of your own mind. But biology does not care about your peace. The brain only wants the next surge, the next spark, the next moment of imagined completion. And so, without noticing, you begin trading presence for pursuit. You stop living in your body and start living inside the chase. Lust is not the enemy. The chemistry is not broken. It is simply a signal, a sign of where the wound is. And when desire is used as escape, it soon begins to take something from us. Have you ever felt like your own desire was pulling you by the wrist, not gently, but with a quiet desperation, as though you were being led somewhere you didn't fully choose? At first, lust feels like freedom, a burst of life, a fire that promises warmth. But fire does not care what it consumes, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the warmth begins to burn. There comes a moment when the craving no longer feels thrilling, it feels heavy. You find yourself reaching for something without even knowing why. You open your phone, you search, you scroll, you fantasize not out of passion but out of habit. A habit that formed where pain was once sitting. The hunger fills the space where meaning should be. And here lies the paradox. The more you indulge, the less alive you feel. The pleasure fades faster each time, leaving behind a softer, deeper numbness. Like drinking salt water, it wets your lips, but it dries your soul. You chase more not because you are greedy, but because the little you get never touches the place that aches. The hunger is not in the body, it is in the heart. There is a loneliness that grows here, a quiet kind, the kind that appears even when someone lies next to you. The body responds, but the soul remains untouched. You become distant inside yourself, watching your own actions from a place of detachment, as if you are only a witness to your impulses, not their author. Lust becomes self-abandonment. You leave yourself to chase yourself. Psychologists describe this as emotional dissociation, the mind disconnecting from the body because it cannot bear to feel what lies beneath the craving. Pleasure becomes a mask, a shield, a temporary amnesia, yet every escape leaves a longer echo of emptiness in its wake. And intimacy, real intimacy, begins to feel frightening, not because you don't want closeness, but because closeness requires being seen. And being seen would reveal the hunger you've been hiding. So you choose intensity over connection, fantasy over presence, stimulation over touch. You try to feel something, anything, and end up feeling less each time. You're not weak for ending up here. You're human. A human who tried to soothe an old wound with the only medicine the world said was allowed. But desire that once made you feel alive now wraps around you like a chain, invisible but undeniably heavy. Yet society does not warn you of this. In fact, it encourages it. Have you ever wondered why desire feels louder today than it ever did before? Why hunger feels constant, relentless, always tugging at your attention? It's not by accident. You live in a world that has learned how to weaponize your longing, a world that discovered something about you. Your desire can be sold back to you. Everywhere you look, the language of attraction is used to capture your gaze. Advertising learned long ago that the quickest way to hijack the human brain is through lust, not because you are shallow, but because your nervous system is ancient. The limbic brain reacts before thought, before logic, before self-awareness. A single image can speak directly to the oldest part of your mind, whispering, "Look here, want this, chase this." You don't choose to want it. The want is cultivated in you. And then there is the endless scroll, a glowing screen that has replaced the heartbeat of your life. Every second delivers something new, something slightly more stimulating, slightly more suggestive, slightly more exciting than the moment before. Social media does not show you what is meaningful. It shows you what keeps you from looking away. Your mind becomes trained to crave novelty, not connection, stimulation, not stillness. The algorithm learns what wakes your hunger and then feeds it back to you on a loop. Music, movies, and influencer culture only amplify this. Desire is glamorized as a lifestyle. Bodies are turned into commodities. Everyone is encouraged to appear available, but emotionally unreachable, close enough to entice, distant enough to maintain fantasy. Intimacy becomes performative, filtered, curated, a game of proximity without vulnerability. Lust becomes entertainment. And somewhere along the way, society whispers a quiet lie in your ear. Freedom means indulgence. That to be liberated, you must say yes to every urge. That restraint is repression. That self-control is outdated. That your hunger is proof you are alive. But ask yourself, if indulgence was the path to peace, why does it leave you more restless each time? Because there is a difference between pleasure and fulfillment, between being stimulated and being nourished, between feeling excited and feeling whole. You live in a world that sells desire without teaching you what to do with it. It keeps you chasing the spark while slowly dimming the flame of your inner life. And when constant stimulation becomes your normal, silence begins to feel unbearable. Stillness feels threatening, presence feels empty. And when this becomes your normal, the cost is far deeper than you realize. Have you noticed that after the rush fades, there is a silence that feels heavier than before? A quiet emptiness that settles in your chest like dusk settling over a quiet town. There is no argument, no chaos, no noise, just the soft ache of something missing. You indulge, you chase, you satisfy the body, and yet the heart remains untouched. This is the loneliness that comes after desire, the part no one talks about. You may lie next to someone, skin to skin, and still feel like there is an ocean between your souls. The moment may have been intense, thrilling, intoxicating, but connection is not born from intensity. It is born from presence, and when lust leads, presence disappears. You feel the contour of a body, but not the warmth of being seen. You hear a voice, but not the echo of being understood. You share closeness without closeness, and when the moment ends, there is a question that lingers in the dark. Why wasn't it enough? This is not shame, this is grief. Grief for the intimacy you needed but could not find. Grief for the parts of you that remain untouched. Grief for the hunger that keeps returning no matter how much you feed it. You don't feel guilty because you desired. You feel guilty because you hoped it would fill you, and it didn't. Psychology calls this emotional dependency, disguised as desire. You are not craving the person you are craving, the feeling of not being alone inside yourself. You are not seeking passion, you are seeking relief. And the more you rely on external moments to soothe internal wounds, the more fragile you become. Every indulgence stretches the distance between your body and your soul a little further, like a thread pulled slowly apart. And so relationships become unstable, not because you are incapable of love, but because desire without grounding is like fire without wood, bright but fleeting. You connect through sparks, not roots, through urgency, not understanding. And deep down, you begin to fear that real intimacy might expose you the hunger, the longing, the child who still waits for a touch that feels like home. But this pain is not your enemy. It is your signal. It is your heart whispering, I need something deeper. I need something true. The path forward is not repression, not force, not war against your own nature. But there is a way out, not by repression, but by understanding. Have you ever noticed how trying to fight your desire only makes it stronger? The moment you tell yourself, I must stop this, the craving grows louder, sharper, almost defiant. Desire doesn't respond to force, it responds to attention. Not the frantic attention of indulgence, but the quiet awareness of understanding. Because the truth is, your desire has never been the enemy. The war was never necessary. The first step is to pause, not to suppress, not to obey, just to witness. When the craving rises, before you act, before imagination takes over, simply feel where it lives in your body. Does it burn in your chest? Does it tighten your throat? Does it pulse behind your ribs? The body speaks in sensation long before the mind translates it into story. When you observe it like this, without running toward it or away from it, something remarkable happens. The monster shrinks. Because it was not a monster, it was a signal. Every desire is carrying a message. When you feel the hunger, ask gently, what am I longing for beneath this? Maybe it's comfort, maybe it's validation, maybe it's the warmth of being chosen, maybe it's simply escape from the quiet weight of your own thoughts. The moment you name the feeling under the lust, you begin to reclaim yourself. Because lust was never about pleasure, it was about filling an absence. And slowly, you learn to hold yourself in that absence, to breathe into it, to sit with it, without needing to run. This is self-intimacy, the most difficult and most powerful form of intimacy. The moment you become able to stay with your own hunger, instead of drowning in it, you begin to transform it. This is where transmutation begins. The redirection of energy, the fire that once scattered you outward, can now be channeled inward into movement, into art, into creation, into purpose, into presence. The urge that once led you to escape life can now be used to build it. The same flame that once consumed you can now illuminate you. When you hold your desire with awareness, it softens. When you listen to what it is asking for, it reveals the wound. And when you tend to that wound, the craving loses its grip, not because you forced it away, but because you no longer need it to survive. Self-control is not force. It is self-understanding. Have you noticed that the strongest parts of you are often the ones you were taught to fear? Your desire, your longing, your hunger, these were never signs of weakness. They were signs that you were alive, that something inside you was reaching for more than numbness, more than silence, more than simply existing. Lust was never the villain. The fire inside you was never dangerous by nature. It only became dangerous when it was left without guidance, without meaning, without a place to rest. There is a difference between being driven by desire and directing it. One is a life lived in reaction, pulled by impulses, habits, old wounds, shadows you pretend not to see. The other is a life lived with awareness, choosing carefully, breathing deeply, understanding the source of your hunger rather than running from it. This is where true power lives, not in suppression, not in purity, not in denying your nature, but in learning to hold your own flame without burning yourself. Think of the child. You once were hungry for love, for safety, for being seen. That hunger did not disappear as you grew. It only changed shape. It learned new languages. It moved into the body, into the imagination, into desire. But at its core, it was always asking the same question: am I allowed to be whole? You spent years trying to answer that question through touch, fantasy, indulgence, escape. But the answer never arrived because the hunger was never for the body, it was for the self. And now, Here you are, more aware than before, more honest. You have looked directly at the fire and realized it was not chaos, but energy. The same energy that can destroy can also create. The same heat that once consumed you can forge you. The same longing that once scattered your attention can become the force that focuses it. This is transmutation. This is maturity. This is the quiet power of someone who knows themselves. You do not need to extinguish your desire. You only need to give it direction, to choose where it lands, to choose what it feeds, to choose what it grows. Because you were never meant to be ruled by your hunger. You were meant to become the one who chooses where the fire burns.